Good evening and a very warm welcome to the Golden Jubilee Conference Hotel. I'm pleased to tell you that this hotel is part of the NHS, and as such, any of the profits that are made through the conference centre and our being here are put back into this facility. So I think it's a very fitting venue for us. And it's also the site of Scotland's shipbuilding and engineering companies. William Beardmore sank, or should I say invested, probably a better word for that, invested about £100 million in today's money into the naval construction works on this site, as the yard was called when it opened in 1906. Now, by the time it closed 25 years later, in 1931, the yard had produced 107 ships, 393 locomotives, and an amazing 539 aircraft. And many of the tenements in the area around here were built by Beardmore for the yard's workers. And if you're interested, the meeting rooms are all named after some of the famous vessels built here, and there's short biographies on the plaques attached to each room. So if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about the history, have a look at the plaques. So I think it is extremely fitting in this site of industry, in this site of well-being and public service, that we are meeting once again as the first Citizens' Assembly of Scotland. Now, in the room, the most important people in the room, of course, are you, the Assembly members. And I am absolutely delighted. It is heartwarming to see so many of you gathering together at this time of year when I know you have lots of other pressures and lots of other commitments. I think it shows a trust and connection that is building up amongst yourselves. It shows a trust with the Secretariat and with the wider Assembly team. But most importantly for me, it shows the trust and commitment that you have as Assembly members to this process. And I am heartwarmed, and I feel you should really, even at the beginning of the weekend, give yourselves a round of applause for that. So it's great to see so many faces back again, and we'll get to know each other, and trust will build again across the weekend. Now, unfortunately, my co-convener, David Martin, is unable to be with us this evening, but he will be joining us at the weekend. So I am going to be steering the ship for this evening. And I just wanted to reiterate that David and I were appointed to make sure that the Assembly delivers on its remit, to make sure that it has the resources needed to allow you to diligently carry out your work, and also that it is run to the highest standards of public administration, and that the resources we have in hand are used to best effect. David and myself are taking this role incredibly seriously on your behalf and on behalf of the Secretariat. And we're approaching it with 7 key principles. The Assembly is independent, it is transparent, it's inclusive, it's accessible, it's balanced in its approach. We are working through a process of cumulative learning, and that we are open-minded. And I sincerely hope that if you have any comments of those 7 principles, that you share it with the Secretariat or with ourselves, because I cannot stress strongly enough how important it is that we see through every action the Assembly takes with those 7 key principles in mind. This evening, I'd like you to get to know each other a little bit more and enjoy the evening, but I'd also like to introduce Kelly McBride, who will be, where's Kelly? Kelly there. Kelly is going to be our lead facilitator this weekend and at all future weekends. And we're also joined this evening by Anthony, who you will remember well from our last weekend. And Anthony and Kelly will be ably assisted by the facilitators in the room, who are wearing their bright blue t-shirts this time around. The post didn't let us down. That's good. I'd also like to reintroduce you to Ian Davidson, who's sitting right at the back of the room. Ian Davidson is the secretary for the Assembly, and he is ably assisted by the Secretariat, who you'll have met again on your way in. On behalf from David and myself, we would like to give a very sincere vote of thanks to Ian and the Secretariat. I think you will be aware of the volume of work that they have carried out, coasting us safely from first weekend to the second weekend. I know it's been a huge amount of work, and I think you have done it with grace and commitment. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to introduce Phil Allen and Kayla Scott, who will be presenting this evening. Kayla is here and Phil is here. And also stewarding group members Doreen Grove, Alan Rennick. Alan? He's hiding at the back. Don't read anything into that. And Alice Kinghorn-Gray. Alice? She's not here yet. Okay. They'll be joining us across the weekend. You'll see that we also have the sound and video crew with us again this weekend. We are filming all the presentations, but for this particular weekend, we don't have any press joining us, and we're not live streaming the events like we did last time. You may be aware that out with this room, there is a general election going on. You might have heard. So David and I and the Secretariat spoke about this at length, and it became apparent to us that we value the work of the Assembly with such high importance that we had to make sure that it was kept completely independent from the general election. We think your work in this room at this moment in time is more important than the general election, and we didn't want that other event to be pulling you off course. But what we will be doing is keeping all the films that we're taking this weekend and putting them up on the website so the wider public can see what we've been discussing and working on after the 12th of December. And I'd like to just confirm at this point that everybody who has asked not to be photographed or filmed, we will be adhering to that request. So I'm the only thing between you and your dinner, so I will not stay here long. But just to give you a little bit of housekeeping, the hotel reception is back in the atrium. If you have any issues with the hotel rooms or the general hotel work, please speak with them. And the Assembly Secretariat have a desk outside where you picked up your badges and your packs, and they'll be available until the end of the dinner. A slight apology if anybody had a delay in the expenses being paid out last time. It was slightly more work than we anticipated to get everybody paid first time around, but now that the process is set up, it should be much quicker and a much more streamlined process. But to assist us with that, if you could make sure that you give your forms to the Secretariat, that you sign them, and that you've checked your bank details and that you've handed in any receipts. You will have received an email from us about the agenda for the weekend. I hope you've had a chance to look at that. If not, please do have a glance over it before the weekend. And you'll know from that tonight we're having a learning dinner looking at how to use evidence. I'll be telling you a little bit more about Phil and Kayla later on, who will be presenting some evidential pieces for us. So, very briefly, the running order for this evening is enjoy your starters and your mains. At about 8:15, we'll have the presentations, and then we'll be able to metaphorically and physically digest those while we have our dessert and coffee, and we'll be finishing at 9 o'clock. So, sincerely, thank you so much for joining us. I think we've got a phenomenal weekend ahead of us, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you across this weekend. Thank you. Okay, so we've had some food, and now we're going to have some food for thought. It's going to tee us up into thinking about the evidence that we're going to hear over the weekend and give us some ideas to kind of chew over and discuss over our pudding and throughout the rest of the evening. We're joined with our first speaker is Phil Allen. Phil is going to talk to us about Trusted Sources, a brief guide to the press and modern media. Now, Phil is the account director with 3X1, who are the public relations company who provide public relations services for the Assembly here. But he also formerly worked as the editor of the Angus County Press and as a journalist on the Press and Journal. So Phil has a huge amount of experience and information to impart with us, and I think maybe slightly provocative as we move through the talk.
Thank you. I'm glad that most of you enjoyed your meal. I certainly didn't, because I'm going to have to speak to you now, so forgive me. I've got 15 minutes, so I'm not going to mess about with much preamble. As Kate said, 20 years experience in news, newspapers, a little bit of broadcasting, and then moved over to what journalists call the dark side, which is PR. So I've got experience in the media from both sides of the fence, if you like. So with no more ado, I'm going to fire through these slides, which I hope are there. There we go, thank God for that. Okay, so I'm going to start just with a quick show of hands. How many people still buy a newspaper on a regular basis? So in a room of 100, what, 20? 25 maybe. Okay, how many people still read a newspaper online or, well, that's good. Good, so that's much more. How many people still see the newspapers as a trusted source of information? Illuminating. Okay, so this slide is called The Power of the Press, and just a little bit of a history lesson. How many people, and this will be dependent on your age, how many people recognize or remember those headlines? Yeah. So we can see that, you know, news is often described as the first draft of history. So it's the first time you get a take on what's happening. So these were all massively historical, cultural events. And these papers, well, those 30 years ago for The Sun, Gotcha, 20 odd years ago for Diana, 15, 16, 17, 18 years ago since the Twin Towers, small event that happened a couple of years ago, I think, there, and Obama as well. So, very, very much part of the culture and massively, massively influential. And what I'm just trying to do is just, for you guys tonight, just get a little bit of thought about where your news comes from and the prism through which the newspapers and television actually present that news to you. Because everybody's got an influence, everybody's got a prejudice, and they tend to get that from the media. So, we looked at the power of the press, and just a couple of things I wanted to do there. Powerful, but if I told you that in the last 15 years, in Britain alone, there is 260 newspapers have closed. 260 newspapers that used to employ journalists, shut, finished, over. So where are people getting their news now? How can you tell that, you know, there is a you know, your events in your local communities are being reported on in a reliable way? It's actually very, very difficult. Newspapers have, you know, circulation has plummeted over those periods of time. Millions of less newspapers sold, as this room demonstrates, compared to what there was a few years back. So it's a challenging time, but the influence that newspapers exert is still considerable. So they're not dead yet, but they're faced with considerable challenges from television and certainly from the internet. So the other main source of news, obviously, is television. And some stats here, which I hope you can read in these slides. This is from a recent report from Ofcom, just in terms of saying that TV still remains the most trusted and most watched form of news. But the fact that social media has actually increased as well. And that there's also an age group difference here. Most older people still view the TV as their most trusted and reliable source of news, whereas younger people tend to gravitate more to social media. And the internet is used by certainly from 16 to 24s, and also from different backgrounds as well. So TV is influential, but it also takes a lot of its agenda from what happens in the press. So TV is 24/7. It's rolling news. That's become a real thing over the last few years as well. But it's often led by a press agenda. So if you watch Andrew Marr, for example, on a Sunday morning, Who are the first guests he has on the morning? Journalists from the Sunday papers. What's the stories that they're talking about on a given Sunday? It's what's happening in the Sunday papers. So that the sort of symbiotic relationship between press and TV still exists. And whatever the news agenda is, it's dictated by the press, but also by events. But that interpretation is always there, and more, we're trying to see that the influences of the people who that are on these programs is actually quite. You need to be aware of it. You need to be aware that if journalists are on Question Time, for example, they are there perhaps with an agenda representing the publications that they work for. So it's just always to try to have remember that what you're being told is always through a specific prism. And, you need to be aware of that. And if you're not, just try to get a little bit more understanding about it is always a good thing. So TV is now, it used to be what, Channels 1, BBC, BBC 2, ITV. Then Channel 4 came along in the UK and subsequently Channel 5. Nowadays we've got, dozens of channels and dozens of news channels that we have as well. So you can see there, just through your own television, you can see what's happening in the States, or from an American point of view with CNN, you can watch Russia Today, and then you've got Fox News or MSNBC. So, there's loads of different places where you can actually see a different interpretation of a specific story. Does anybody watch these news stations, or are these all pretty unfamiliar to you? Do people try to get the news from different areas? No? Yeah? A few of you, yeah. And it's not a quiz, but what you'll see is that they will have a different take on a story. So, if you want to try to get a balance, do you watch both Russia Today and CNN, or, what I'm trying to say is read or watch as many different sources as you can and try to come up with a balanced view. So all of that really has been completely exploded by social media. So, where once, you could define yourself by which newspaper you read. You were either, you were a Times man, or, you were a woman who read the Daily Mail, and that kind of defined, how you actually lived your life, and your worldview was governed by that. But in the social media age, that's been completely exploded. So you can get so much news and so many different areas that people can actually pick up information from. So, people ask, well, what happened last week? And you'll just go, well, just Google it. Just go and have a look on the internet and see what you can find on there. So I was just looking for some stats that would actually kind of explain this, and how the proportion of news on social media has actually gone through the roof, really. So we talked about some people who read newspapers. How many people get their news from Facebook? Reasonable amount. Twitter people, regular Twitter users. It's quite a lot of that. That's quite interesting. And then to a lesser extent, Instagram and Snapchat, which are a little bit lower. But if you're getting your news from that, what are you actually getting? And there he is, the boy himself. So Trump has coined the phrase fake news, but I don't think it's disputed whether it actually existed before he did or not. But certainly people have become more aware of this, as I have become of that 5-minute sign over there. So I'm going to have to wrap up really quickly. But what we're looking at is that fake news isn't new. It used to be called propaganda. It used to be called spin. And now fake news is possibly, just a different interpretation of what it's all about. So, who can you trust? Does everybody recognize who's there? Yeah, the guy with the armband, Joseph Goebbels. Then we've got communist propaganda down there. And then we've got Zuckerberg there from Facebook. And just a couple of other guy from Cambridge Analytica as well. So who can you trust? And what I actually wanted to do was just give you a couple of tips about how you can actually tackle fake news or try to understand, what's actually going to be, means of trying to protect yourself from people who are out to kid you. So probably the most important thing is to read critically, and always question the information that you're receiving. And does it kind of accord with your own prejudices, or does it actually, challenge you to think about issues in a different way? And, if you're going to look, I was speaking to a couple of the guys down at the table there, it's like, if you only ever read one source of news, you're possibly going to be influenced in a way that you're probably not even aware of. If you read the Daily Mail, you're going to have a certain worldview. If you read The Guardian, you're going to have a separate a different worldview. But what's really interesting is try to understand both worldviews, because what you might find is a middle path there, but never actually take it at face value. And it's becoming a much, much more challenging thing for people to try to understand and interpret when there's so many information sources nowadays. It is genuinely, literally mind-boggling. So that's all well and good when you talk about trusted sources. But what happens when the sources that you believe or should be trusted, like the government, they start becoming questionable in terms of how they actually are promoting things? Just a couple of very, very quick ones there. Everyone aware of the fact check site? Did everyone aware of that story? Whereas the Conservative Party pretended it was a fact-checking site on the day that the Labour Party manifesto was launched. That becomes a real blurring of, what's misinformation and disinformation. You recognise that video there, but that's when, again, and I'm not trying to pose a political point, but the Conservative Party, again, edited a video from Keir Starmer to make it look like Starmer was a stuttering fool, and you may have your own opinions on that, but they were certainly trying to manipulate the message there. Leave EU down there, again, facing false information, fake facts, manipulation, which is just amplified by social media. So it becomes a real challenge to try to understand where the truth lies. So all I wanted to do was really just try to, if you were feeling overwhelmed by it, or if it's something that you feel that you should be more aware of. So these are some of the sites I think that can help you if you want to check your facts. But I suppose the underlying message is that, trust your sources, but it's very, very difficult in this modern age. So when you come to something like the Citizens' Assembly, where you've got a much more deliberative approach, and you've got an opportunity to sit down and listen to evidence, sit down, talk amongst yourselves about pretty significant issues that I know you're going to be dealing with. This kind of deliberative democracy is actually really quite a good thing. And I'm not speaking as a PR person for the Citizens' Assembly, but just my experience of it so far has been very, very encouraging. So it's a great opportunity. It is an innovative approach that Scotland is undertaking here. And hopefully in the next couple of months you'll understand what the media interest in this is. I think perhaps maybe by the next meeting we'll start seeing that international media interest that we've been dealing with in the last few weeks will be evident as people want to come and see what you guys are up to. So I think I've got 3 seconds left or something like that. That was a very, very potted kind of explanation about how the media works. And if you do want to speak to me, I'll be around later on. By all means, come and say hello. So I think on that, I'm being told that that's it. I'm done. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. And of course, there are copies of Phil's slides available on one of the tables outside. I think a bit of a canter through the history of the press there. And now, the last presentation for this evening before you can have your sweet and coffee and kind of discuss and debate the things that you've heard. We have Kayla Scott. She is going to speak with us about how do we ensure we have informed conversations. Kayla is Head of Democratic Innovation at Involve, a public participation charity, Involve, and is an expert advisor to the Assembly Secretariat. So Kayla, you're focusing on developing theory and practice around public engagement and new forms of democratic innovation.
Yep.
Thank you.
I need to put this down.
You need to put that down and have that. Thank you.
Okay, so hello. So most of you will have seen me speaking a bit last weekend and seen me around. So I'm part of the Secretariat, but very much, as Kate said, work around this idea of public participation and deliberation as part of my permanent job. So, right, what I'm going to talk to you about is a bit building on what Phil's just talked about. How do we make sure that the conversations we have here within the Citizens' Assembly are actually informed and are effectively informed so we can be confident in the evidence and things that we're using? So if you think back to Kate's initial presentation, opening statements on our first Saturday we were together, she talked about the fact that we wanted to do something different here. We wanted to move away from some of the debates that go on in Scotland and the rest of the country about things that are important, and try and have different types of conversations that were respectful and mature and based on information and deliberation. But what does that really mean, and how do we get there? We have a tradition within this country of really using debate. Debate is the way that a lot of important public discussions about issues that are important to us take place. From the Scottish Parliament and their debating chamber there, the debates that we see on TV, that's how we see this sort of people trying to make sense of or make the case for different types of arguments. But this idea of debate is a really particular one. The whole word debate literally means to beat down. It's about winning. It's about people arguing it out and trying to persuade you that their view is right. And the outcome usually leads to this idea of a win-lose. It's a very two-sided way of having a conversation. But when we talk about deliberation, we're talking about something different. We're talking about that idea of weighing up, looking at different options, balancing them up, and trying to build a consensus, find out where we have common ground that we can build upon. So that instead of trying to find a win-lose, ideally you're aiming for a win-win, or at least something that actually everyone goes, yeah, I can live with that. That's the type of thing. It seems to fit and feel right for me. But to get to that point of deliberation and to get to it in a way that people are actually able to make those trade-offs and recognise where those differences are, actually the foundation is information. The foundation is that learning, and in the case of the Citizens' Assembly, that taking of evidence, having people come and speak to you to build up your understanding of different things. We use that through discussion so that we make sure we all understand and we hear what other people's perspectives are, but then take it to a deliberation where we can look at trade-offs and find where we've got common ground. So if we're talking about evidence and evidence at the Citizens' Assembly, and we're really going to start moving into a lot of this tomorrow, this idea that evidence can come in a number of forms, and as Phil has said, you know, there's lots of different ways people are getting information. But actually, particular types of information that we're likely to be getting as we work forward through the Citizens' Assembly is this idea of factual information about Scotland and the state and what we're doing and where things are at the moment, but also evidence that as the Assembly we may choose to commission to actually bring in, this is what we're interested in finding out more about, and bring evidence into us. Now, a lot of that will go through this idea of witness evidence. So the people who are going to come and talk to you about different things as we move forward are being called witnesses, okay? And they're witnesses because they actually have, this is where I do need my notes. They're considered to be particularly knowledgeable or particularly skillful in a specific area, and that's why they're being selected to come and speak to you. Now, there's 3 different types of witnesses that we're going to be bringing to you over the next few weekends, probably. Now, there's these knowledge experts, so individuals with that specialist knowledge about a particular issue or a particular topic. And someone like Nicola, who came in and was speaking about the constitutional issues, comes in there. Stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are a bit different. We're calling them stakeholders because they're coming in because they believe in something. They're there to present a case for one thing or another to you. And experiential witnesses. So they are those members of the public. So they're people who are coming and talking about their own experience of an issue. So there's 3 different types of evidence. Now, in your packs when you arrived today, you would have had a paper there about evidential standards. And this sets out in a bit more detail how the Secretariat and the conveners are going to go about choosing who it is that comes to present different types of information for you. And do it in a way that actually makes sure that the evidence that the Assembly presents to you is balanced, is diverse, so looking at different sides of an issue, is accessible. We need it to make sense. People are coming from a whole lot of different areas of knowledge already, so we need to make sure that everyone across the room actually is able to engage with this type of information, that it's robust, that it's serious, and that it comes from credible sources. But while we can do our bit, it's up to you how you interpret that. And people will give different weights of value to different types of evidence. But we need you to think about this and think about some of these ideas, how you're approaching the evidence that's presented to you. Because evidence isn't self-evident. It needs to be interpreted. Any evidence is selected from among a whole range of information sources that are out there. Facts are not neutral. And that comes into that idea of, like, there are things that are facts. But if I present to you as a survey result a fact that 80% of people are really happy with waiting times at their GP surgery, might be a fact. I can sell this as a great news story. But actually, it's still 20% of people, which is 1 in every 5 people, who aren't happy about that. And if I was coming from a different perspective, I could sell that to you as this is a crisis, we need to move. So it's about thinking that facts aren't necessarily neutral. And knowledge is not all the same. We're talking about these different types of sources. Some people you hear from, they're going to be coming from a more theoretical perspective, something they've studied, they've learnt a lot about. Others will be doing it from the idea of social research. They've gone out, they've surveyed, 5,000 people across Scotland and come up with certain results, and they're coming to talk to you. And others will be talking about their own experience, things they've seen firsthand. These are all different types of evidence, and you, individually, might give more importance to one or the other. And that's something that we do, depending on where we stand on a whole lot of other moral and ethical issues. And also, as much as we can do our bit to bring in robust, credible information to you, you're not empty vessels. You all know things. You're all reading news, you're all seeing all sorts of stuff. And over the course of the weekends, the things that you know, and the things that you think you know, but actually might have come from a less reliable source, you're going to be sharing them with each other as well. So we need to be thinking about how we take evidence on board. And really that comes down to this idea of critical thinking. And critical thinking, and Phil mentioned it as well, is not just about being critical. It's not just about finding the flaws, finding the gaps, finding the fake news. It's also about that idea of stepping back and looking at the evidence, asking questions, thinking about where it comes from, and also recognizing your own cognitive biases. Now, cognitive biases is really just that usually unconscious way that the information is presented to you is interpreted and understood in your own mind. So when we ask people to sort of step back and think about those cognitive biases, it's almost like being asked to step back and take a little walk through your own head to think about, well, why do I react to some things in certain ways? Why do some things seem intuitively like, oh, that makes a lot of sense? Is it because of the way the person presents it? Is it because of the qualifications of the person who presents it? Or is it just actually like what they were wearing that day? So there are a couple of specific cognitive biases that I want to talk a little bit more about because they're particularly relevant to the types of discussions that we're going to be having over the next couple of weekends that we're together. And what we need to think about is that these cognitive biases, I'm going to go back one slide. These cognitive biases are not a bad thing. They're normal. We all have them. It's how we interpret the world around us all the time. If we had to stop and critically think about and deliberately think about every decision that we make and every opinion that we have all the time, we'd never get anywhere. So they're natural and they're normal. But what's been discovered is that actually these aren't just individual quirks. A lot of research has shown that actually there's systematic and regular types of cognitive biases that cut across populations and have some level of impact on most people. So that's where I want to talk about some of the few specific ones. So one of the first ones, and one of the really obvious ones, is this idea of confirmation bias. And it's that tendency to react more favourably and also remember much more easily the things that confirm what you already know, or what you already think you know, or what feels right to you. And sometimes we need to step back from that one. So when we're doing these conversations as we go along, try and do that in your head. That step back and go, am I just remembering the bits that, made the most sense to me? Because actually, even though we might be listening to the same thing, we're not necessarily always all hearing the same thing, because we hear and we remember some of the things that kind of reflect what we already know. In-group bias. Most of us have a tendency to treat people that we see as being a bit like ourselves more seriously. We take more seriously, more favourably the types of things that they say. And we can unconsciously give more weight to the views of people that we go, yeah, you're like me, so therefore you're right because I'm right. So we have a really diverse group here, and we need to occasionally step back and go, let's pay attention to what someone's actually saying rather than making some of those assumptions. Conservatism bias. And again, this is not a political point, but it is one of those factors that actually, once we've put our opinion out there, it can be a really natural thing to keep sticking to it. Once you've put the view out there that this is what I think about something, it's hard to have to say again publicly, oh, actually, you've said something really interesting that's made me change my mind. So, this is that conservatism bias that can get in the way of having that type of deliberative conversation and dialogue where we understand each other's perspectives better and suddenly might get a new insight into something important. Identifiable victim bias. Now, this sounds a bit strange because actually the word victim, but it's the way it gets termed. That idea that actually most of us are more likely to be moved, to pay attention to give more weight to that personal story of someone. When someone's telling you something real that's happened to them, it can feel a lot more important sometimes, and we remember the details, than potentially an academic talking about exactly the same circumstances, that this person might have been one of 5,000 that were affected. But actually these large distant numbers often don't have the same resonance with us. And if we're talking about those different types of evidence and different type of witnesses that will come, we might need to keep that in mind. And also when we're talking to each other, someone tells you a really emotive story that as actually their truth experience, it makes more sense than someone talking about, oh, well, theoretically, I heard from my mate that somebody else had this thing happen to them. So these are some of the things we need to balance when we're thinking about what weight do we give to different types of evidence. And most of us like to be liked. Most of us set out to actually get on with the people we're spending time with. And that's the idea of social desirability bias, that tendency to respond in ways that, we think someone wants to hear. We want them to like us. And in these discussions, we are going to be moving into more challenging, more divisive, more, split opinions. And we need to be able to have those conversations without feeling, but people might not like me anymore, I won't fit in. And that comes across really strongly with this idea of groupthink. And that's one of the risks in an assembly like this, is that actually if we all start finding that middle ground and no one really wants to express an outlier opinion because actually we want to fit in with the group and we want to have a good time, that doesn't help us reach consensus. It actually just stops that critical evaluation of different viewpoints and can actually damage the conversations. So, this is me finishing, and I'm going to hand you back and you'll get your dessert. But you've heard from me, you've heard from Phil. Hopefully we've prompted some thoughts in your head. And it'd be good at the tables just to even spend the first little while till your dessert comes, just having a bit of a reflection, a bit of a discussion about, well, what sort of information do we trust most? Do you recognise some of these things in yourself? And how could they have an impact on our discussions over the next few weekends if we don't step back and think about them? So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to Phil and Kayla for getting us started on our journey for the weekend. I just wanted to introduce myself briefly and give you a few details for tomorrow. So my name is Kelly McBride. I'm going to be the lead facilitator for the weekend. So you're going to see me popping up across Saturday and Sunday, telling you a little bit about some of the activities we're going to be doing and some of the discussions that we'll be having, and just generally floating around the room to be a helping hand and guide you on your way. So for those of you that may be feeling a bit tired at this point, I just wanted to let you know that it's absolutely fine if you want to go away to bed or just spend some time and not hang around for the dessert and coffee that's coming. So please, if you want to go away at this point, you're very, very welcome to do so. But otherwise, you're very welcome to all stay for dessert and coffee, and we'll be in this room till just after 9 o'clock tonight. Tomorrow we'll be having breakfast from 7:30 a.m. and you'll be welcome to come and register from 8:30, and we'll be starting sharply at 9 o'clock in the room. So I look forward to seeing you all there. I think we're going to have a fantastic weekend of discussion. But please, if you're staying, do enjoy your dessert, but you're very welcome to pop ahead to bed at this point too. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow.